ink whispered in the silence. Corin Vale sat motionless at his work table, brush hovering above the blank expanse of paper. Outside, the wind swept along the narrow lane, carrying the faint clatter of looms and the distant calls of hawkers. In here, inside the forgotten paper atelier at the edge of the textile district, only the ticking of the wall clock kept time with his heart. His fingers trembled. Steady, he murmured to himself, though his voice came out thin and dry. Just a small glyph. A harmless hinge, that's all. The candlelight pooled over the page, over his hand, over the pale lines spidering across his skin. In places, his fingers looked as if they were made of paper already too smooth, too matte, like someone had pressed his flesh between the pages of a book and left it there to dry. He took a breath. The ink in the porcelain dish glistened, rich and black and eager. You don't have to use it today, he told himself. You have enough prepared. You don't need to risk. A gust rattled the warped window. A strand of paper hanging from the rafters twisted, as if listening. In the dim loft space above, stacks of folded sheets rustled faintly. Old habits. Old magic. The atelier remembered what it had been built for. He lowered the brush. The first stroke was a curve, looping like a question. The ink sank into the page with a quiet, thirsty sound. The second stroke crossed it cleanly, the beginnings of the hinge glyph. His vision sharpened. The lines seemed to glow ever so slightly, not with light, but with promise. His breath eased as the familiar pattern took shape under his hand. He finished the glyph in 12 sure strokes. Good, he whispered. The page shivered. Only once, a subtle ripple. The glyph tightened upon itself and then lay flat, inert. Not sentient. Not even semi-autonomous. Just a hinge, barely more than a suggestion of movement, a little trick meant to bend paper where it otherwise wouldn't want to bend. No voice. No eyes opening behind the lines. No hungry, reaching will. Relief washed through him so hard he had to set the brush down. Good, he repeated. That's enough for today. He should have stopped earlier. He could feel it in his skin. The back of his hand prickled the way paper did when you ran a fingernail along its grain. He flexed his fingers, feeling the odd, papery slide of his joints, and pushed the page away. The curse never screamed, never crackled with drama like the stories claimed. It crept. Each spell laid another thin layer over him, sealing him piece by piece. One day, if he cast too deeply, he would wake to find himself nothing but a husk of folded parchment, his ink dried, his thoughts stiff and silent. He stood, joints protesting, and carried the page to the drying rack. Rows of practical glyphs already hung there, clamps, folds, minor reinforcing sigils designed to keep paper from crumpling under stress. Safe things, or as safe as his craft could be. A thud sounded from the street. Corin froze, listening. The workshop had no front sign and no customers. He took his rare commissions by coded note through the back door. Anyone at the door at this hour meant trouble. Or desperation. Sometimes, the two were the same. Another thud, followed by a muffled curse in a voice he didn't recognize. Corin reached for the small paper charm tucked under the edge of his table, a flattened circle of layered sheets, etched with a simple ward. The moment his fingers brushed it, an invisible veil settled over the room, dulling the glow of the candle and the smell of ink. The charm obscured sound and presence just enough that casual passers-by would overlook the atelier. But whoever was out there was not passing by. Another thud made the door shudder on its hinges. Open, a breathless voice hissed. Come on, please open. This close, the ward distorted the sound into a strange, far-off echo, but the panic was unmistakable. Corin hesitated. The city was not kind to strangers, especially in this district, where guild guards and patrols walked more often than the cobblers and cloth sellers who fed them. Someone fleeing could be bait. Or worse, it could be a paper-mage hunter forcing him to reveal himself. He should stay silent. That was what caution demanded. That was how he had survived this long, by doing nothing, by never, ever answering a knock. The thud came again, weaker. A scrape. Then a soft, resigned sound like a body sliding down the door. Corin let go of the charm. The veil lifted, the room sharpening back into itself. His heartbeat seemed suddenly too loud. Idiot, he muttered at himself. He walked to the door and pressed his ear against the wood. Outside, he heard labored breathing, then a muffled groan. "Who's there?" he called, keeping his hand on the hidden latch of a paper knife beneath the counter, a slender blade made of layered, hardened sheets. Sorry," the muffled voice stammered. "I didn't know it was occupied. I just needed, just." The words slurred a little, as though their owner were dizzy. "What do you need?" Corin asked. Footsteps stomped past outside, heavier, disciplined. Guild patrol boots. He'd learned that rhythm well. Did she come this way? Check the alleys. Corin swore silently. "Inside," he said, undoing the bolt more quickly than he liked. "Move, now." The door swung inward just far enough to admit a figure who half stumbled, half fell through it, a young woman in travel-worn clothes that had once been fine. Her coat was a muted teal, the fabric sturdy and expensive, now smeared with street dust and chalk from the loom's crumbling facades. Her boots were the kind that had been made to look fashionable first and functional second. Her hair was a deep auburn, pinned in a style that had come mostly undone. Stray curls clung to her temples, damp with sweat. She clutched a bulging satchel to her chest, as if it contained her last fragment of safety. She nearly collided with Corin. He caught her by the elbow on instinct, feeling the solid warmth of her beneath the fabric. "Careful," he murmured. She blinked up at him. Her eyes were a startling hazel, ringed with gold. Not the eyes of a hunter. Not the eyes of someone who would calmly hand him over for a bounty. "Thank you," she whispered. He shut the door quickly and slid the bolt home just as a patrol shadow fell across the slats. The doorknob rattled once, then stopped. A brief pause, and then the footsteps moved on. The woman and Corin both held their breath until the sound faded. Only then did he realize he was still holding her elbow. He let go abruptly and stepped back. "You shouldn't have opened for me," she said, voice soft. "They might have been with me." "They nearly were," Corin replied. "It's done now." She straightened, smoothing her coat with one hand, the other still white-knuckled around her satchel. She glanced around the workshop, taking in the heavy work table, the drying racks, the stacks of carefully stored paper. "This is," she narrowed her eyes. "A paper atelier." The way she said it held no fear, only recognition and a spark of curiosity. "No," he said reflexively. "It's a bookbinder's shop." Her gaze flicked to the wall, where an old, faded sign still hung, a quill crossed over a folded sheet, the symbol once used by licensed paper-mags before the ban. "An extremely quiet bookbinder's shop," she said. "With sigil racks." He silently cursed himself for not taking the sign down years ago. Familiarity bred carelessness. "I am not interested in trouble," he said. "If you've brought any with you, you'll need to be on your way as soon as the street is clear." Her mouth quirked, as if she wanted to argue, but exhaustion sanded the expression down to something more subdued. "I'm not trouble," she answered after a moment. "Or, I'm only trouble to a very specific kind of man, and he's not here. Yet." That's surprisingly not reassuring. He moved away from the door, motioning toward the room's one low stool. "Sit. You're short of breath." "I ran," she said simply, crossing the workshop to perch on the stool. Her boots scuffed the floor, leaving pale marks in the dust. "And then I took a wrong turn, and then another. It seems your district doesn't like outsiders." "Our district doesn't particularly like anyone," Corin said. "But it tolerates commerce." "What did you do to attract a patrol's attention?" She hesitated, studying him. He read the calculations in her expression, how much to reveal, what to invent, whether he looked like someone who would sell her out. He knew the look too well. He'd given it once, in another life, when someone had offered him a hand. "I ran away," she said finally. "From a guild house. From a man I'm supposed to call master. A guild apprentice." That explained the quality of her clothes, the slight callus on her fingers, the faint smell of thread oil clinging to her. "Which guild?" Corin asked. She drew herself up, as if bracing for judgment. "The Tailors' Consortium of High Fenwick. Was Lira Fenwick, journeyman seamcrafter." The name tugged at some half-remembered notice he'd once seen, decades ago, about a rising prodigy in enchanted tailoring. If that was her, She was younger than he would have expected, and farther from that glittering world than he would have imagined. Journeyman, he repeated. You don't sound convinced. Well, technically I've just demoted myself to runaway, she replied. I left a note. It was not appreciated. Corin almost smiled. Almost. Rest, he said instead. The patrol will circle back once before they give up. When they do, you can leave. She shifted on the stool, grimacing as though some muscle protested the movement. Leave to where? She muttered. He ignored that. It was not his business. He walked back to the work table, pinching the bridge of his nose. His hand did not feel like skin. It felt like the corner of a page. Thank you, she said after a quiet moment. For opening the door. You're not the only one who knows what it is to run from a guild house, he replied, before he could stop himself. She tilted her head. You're a guild man, then? I was, he said. Once. The paper order, she guessed. Before the ban? He went still. Who told you that? He asked, sharper than he intended. She lifted her hands, palms outward. No one. I only guessed. This atelier has the old marks, and your hands, her gaze flicked to his fingers, lingering on the strange texture. They look like they've handled more than ledger paper. He curled his hands into fists. I don't practice, he said. Not anymore. She glanced pointedly at the drying rack, where a dozen fresh glyph sheets hung. Of course not, she said solemnly. Those must be purely decorative. Something like a laugh surprised him, brittle and unused. You are impertinent, he said. I'm tired, she corrected. Tired and very recently unemployed. Outside, the patrol's boots marched past again. Voices faded. The city resumed its ordinary roar, the hum of looms and clack of carriage wheels. The danger was, for the moment, moving on. Lira exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging in relief. So, she said. I suppose I owe you more than my name. You owe me nothing, Corin replied. You needed a door. I opened it. She frowned, as if the simplicity of it annoyed her. Then perhaps we can call it even later, she said. If you ever need a seam mended or a hem enchanted to never trip you. I'm quite good. I don't trip, he said automatically. Her gaze flicked to the ink stains on his cuff. No, she agreed. You strike me as the type who simply falls. He swallowed a smile. She set her satchel on her knees and hugged it loosely. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she seemed to genuinely see the room for the first time. Her eyes moved slowly over the hanging strands of test paper, the careful stacks sorted by texture and weight, the wall where Corin had pinned sketches of constructs he'd never dared to build. There are no constructs, she said quietly. No ink-born. The word came out hushed, half fear, half wonder. I thought everyone who still practiced kept at least one. Everyone who still practices has already lost too much to stop, Corin said. And I am not everyone. Do you hate them? She asked. The ink-born? He hesitated. Images rose unbidden, paper golems lumbering through the capital streets, glyphs blazing across their bodies, eyes like ink wells reflecting flame and terror. Screams. His own work, marching out of his control. I fear them, he said at last. Fear what they were made to do. Made by people like you, she said softly. And what became of those people? They were outlawed, he said. If they were fortunate. If not, they were burned with their creations. Silence fell between them like a page turning. Lyra's gaze went to his hands again. And you? I was cursed, he answered. A gentler sentence, some would say. She studied his face, as if looking for the edges of that curse. Is that why your skin looks different? He nodded once. Every spell I cast presses more of the curse into place, he said. One day I'll become nothing more than what I create. That seems unfair, she said. Unfairness was rather the theme of that era, he replied dryly. She looked down at her satchel, fingers tracing the seam. In the tailor's consortium, we're taught that paper-mages were reckless, that they cared more about novelty than safety. That the ink-born uprising happened because no one set proper limits. And what do the tailor's stories say about themselves? He asked. That we stepped in to stabilize the realm with disciplined enchantments, she said wryly. That our stitches held the kingdom together while paper burned. Convenient. Yes, well, she sighed. We also tell ourselves that apprentices are grateful for the guidance of their masters. So you can see how accurate we are. He let himself smile properly this time. You truly ran away, then, he said. No games, no secret assignment. I left a note, she said again, tone dry. It contained far too much honesty for a secret assignment. What did it say? Her cheeks colored faintly. That I would rather stitch hems in a gutter than spend one more day as a decorative needle in Master Calder's pincushion of a house. Corin tried to stifle a snort and failed. The sound startled both of them. You don't understand, she insisted. He would have used my work to clothe tyrants and call it art. Glamour gowns to disguise bribes, uniforms that make cowards look like heroes. I wanted something else. What? He asked. She looked up, and in her eyes there was a naked kind of longing that had nothing to do with guild rank or accolades. I wanted to make things that help people disappear, she said. If they need to. A cloak that lets a servant slip past his master unrecognized. A dress that makes a girl unnoticeable to someone who stares too long. Disguises that belong to the wearer, not to whoever holds the purse strings. She hesitated, then added, Master Calder called that a waste of talent. Corin's gaze flicked to his racks of glyphs. Hinge spells. Reinforcing sigils. Small things for small needs. He'd told himself that was all he was allowed. All that was safe. I make paper locks, he said. For people who can't afford steel ones. Wards that alert them if someone opens their door. Seals for letters that scream if anyone else breaks them. Nothing grand. But you could, she said quietly. Once. He did not answer. She looked around again, at the space that had become his echo chamber. I have a theory, she said. That there's a middle ground between reckless power and fearful silence. Between the inkborn and the empty page. If you've come here to lecture me on bravery, you've chosen a poor day, he said. Or a poor man. You opened the door, she said simply. That counts for something. Before he could reply, someone banged on the window. Both of them stiffened. Corin's hand flew to the paper knife. Lira grabbed her satchel tighter, eyes wide. Easy, came a muffled hiss. It's me. Corin recognized that voice, a low, rasping tone like someone who'd spent too many years shouting over crowds. He relaxed his grip slightly and crossed to the window. A quick flick of his fingers brought a thin sheet of warded paper down like a curtain, cloaking the interior. Only then did he open the shutter a crack. Cyrene Astfel's face appeared in the gap, her dark hair tied back in a rough knot, her eyes sharp even in the dim light. You're jumpier than usual, Vale, she said. New hobby? I don't call letting in fugitives a hobby, he replied. What are you doing here? She jerked her chin toward the street. Heard patrol boots. Wanted to make sure you hadn't done anything stupid. Again. I haven't, he said. Yet. Her gaze flicked past him, toward the blurred outline of Lira on the stool. Who's that? Cyrene asked. You finally hired an assistant. None of your concern, Corin said. Cyrene raised an eyebrow. Everything in this district is my concern. Lira slid off the stool, coming into view at the edge of the window. I'm just leaving, she said quickly. Thank you for the shelter. I'll get out of your hair. Out of his hair, maybe, Cyrene said. But you are very much in mine the moment you step outside. Patrols are on edge tonight. They're looking for someone. They're looking for me, Lira admitted. But I'll be careful. That's what everyone says, Cyrene replied. Right before they're dragged into a wagon. What did you do? Ran away from a tailor, Lira said. Apparently that's a civic offense now. From which tailor? Cyrene pressed. Master Calder, Lira said reluctantly. Cyrene let out a low whistle. You don't pick the small enemies, do you? I didn't pick him either, Lira muttered. Cyrene's eyes turned calculating, flicking between Lira and Corin. A seamcrafter and a paper hermit, she said. That's an interesting combination. It's temporary, Corin said firmly. Cyrene ignored him. Can you enchant disguises? She asked Lira. Seamcraft, not just hemming. Lira straightened a little, pride worn thin but still present. I can do more than hemming. Cyrene nodded, satisfied. Good. We need help. Corin demanded. I didn't agree to anything. You're not the only one who can pull him out of hiding, it seems, Cyrene said, tilting her head toward Lira. Vale, listen. Guild patrols have doubled at the gates. They're checking papers, faces, everything. My couriers are having a harder time moving unnoticed. If they had a way to slip past identifications. She let the thought hang. No, Corin said immediately. Absolutely not. You know what happens when we blend crafts. It's unstable. It's effective, Cyrene countered. The last time you made a hybrid ward for us, our whole cell got out of the South Watch unscathed. That was a minor reinforcement charm stitched along a coat lining, Corin snapped. It nearly tore the seams apart from the inside. If we do more. Lira repeated, eyes brightening despite herself. You've already done hybrid work together? Corin rubbed his temples. We experimented. Once. It was a mistake. Was it? Cyrene asked. Because it worked. At the cost of my curse flaring for a week. You're still standing, Cyrene pointed out. And the people that enchantment protected are still alive. Lyra's gaze slid from Cyrene to Corin, weighing, testing. What exactly are you asking us to make? She asked. Cyrene did not miss the us, and Corin cursed inwardly. Enchanted disguises, Cyrene said. Garments that can shift a person's appearance just enough to pass inspection. Change their hair color, their jawline, the fall of their shoulders. Not illusions, patrols have anti-glamour wards now. I'm talking about real, physical adjustments. Cloth and paper working together. That's impossible, Corin said. It's difficult, Lira corrected. Not impossible. He turned to her, incredulous. We barely know each other. You were being chased 10 minutes ago, and now you want to rewrite people's silhouettes. Her hazel eyes met his, unwavering. If I can help someone slip past Master Calder's hired thugs, or a patrol that's about to drag them to a dungeon, why wouldn't I? Because the more powerful the enchantment, the more dangerous it becomes, he said. Especially if it's hybrid craft. The last time paper and cloth merged at scale, we got Inkborn wrapped in armor. You heard those stories. Stories, she said. Told by guilds that benefited from fear. I'm not saying there's no danger. I'm saying we might be able to contain it. Contain it how? He demanded. By setting rules, she said. Limits. By directing the magic into specific seams, specific folds, so it has nowhere else to go. The Tailor's Consortium taught me how to make enchantments precise. Maybe your glyphs can provide structure instead of chaos. Cyrene's attention darted between them like a spectator at a match. You two argue like you've been working together for years, she said. We haven't been working together at all, Corin protested. Lira hugged her satchel tighter. You said yourself you make wards for people who can't afford steel, she said. Why not go a step further? If you'll open a door for me, why not open a door for those couriers she mentioned? He wanted to refuse. The words lined up on his tongue, heavy with decades of fear. He imagined hybrid disguises gone wrong, cloth tightening like a noose, paper hardening against a wearer's will. He thought of his curse, of his skin growing thinner, of waking with his face stiff and folded. But he also imagined a courier walking freely through a gate with nothing but a slight shift of a lapel and a whisper of altered textile. No illusions, no wild constructs, just clever craft. Just one prototype, Lira said softly. One garment. If it proves too unstable, we abandon the idea. If it works, Cyrene cut in, we could change how we move through this city. Corin closed his eyes for a moment. The curse was already there, baked into his bones. It wouldn't fade if he stayed quiet. It would linger, waiting. Doing nothing had never undone anything. He opened his eyes. One garment, he said. No more for now. We set strict limits on the enchantments. And Cyrene, if I say we stop, we stop. No coaxing, no clever arguments. Cyrene smiled thinly. I would never argue with you, Vale. You argue with everyone, he muttered. Lyra's face lit up, exhaustion momentarily forgotten. We'll need a base piece, she said, already slipping into practical mode. Something neutral. A coat, perhaps. We can design seams that alter the fall of the fabric when triggered. And glyph hinges at the stress points, Corin added reluctantly, mind beginning to outline patterns despite himself. They could redistribute weight, shift posture slightly. Exactly, she said. The coat becomes a disguise, not a costume. We want subtlety, not drama. Cyrene tapped the window frame. I'll bring someone tomorrow who needs a trial run, she said. A volunteer. No, Corin said sharply. No live subjects until we've tested it ourselves. On whom, then? Cyrene asked. Corin and Lira exchanged a glance. We'll test it on me, Lira said at once. No, Corin replied. She lifted her chin. It was my idea. And my curse, he returned. If anything goes wrong with the glyphs, then we'll design it so your glyphs reinforce, and my seams direct, she said. We'll share the risk. Cyrene let out a short laugh. You two are going to be interesting. Corin rubbed his temple. Get out of my window, Cyrene. She saluted mockingly. I'll be back tomorrow. Try not to blow up the district in the meantime. She disappeared, leaving the night to press against the glass. Corin let the curtain fall back and closed the shutter with a quiet click. The workshop seemed smaller now with the decision hanging in the air, crowded not by objects but by possibility. You don't have to go through with this, he said to Lira without turning. You can walk away when the patrol's thin. Find another district. Another city. And leave you to shoulder this alone, she asked. After you opened the door. He looked back at her. Her hair had come almost completely loose, a few stubborn pins clinging on. Her coat had a tear at the hem, thread dangling like an unfinished thought. She looked tired and determined and very, very real. I'm not your responsibility, he said quietly. I'm not yours either, she replied. But here we are, complicating each other's lives anyway. A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. Fine, he said. If we're doing this, we do it properly. There is no room for sloppy craft in hybrid work. It has to be precise. She straightened. I don't do sloppy. He gestured to the work table. Show me. She took a breath, then set her satchel on the table and unbuckled it. Inside were neatly wrapped bundles of fabric, spools of thread in various muted hues, a small tin of silver pins, and a worn leather notebook covered in tiny sketches of garments. As she spread her tools out beside his ink dishes and brushes, something shifted in the room. The atelier had always been filled with potential, with what ifs and never against. Now, for the first time in years, it hummed with shared intent. Corin pulled a roll of sturdy, unremarkable cloth from a shelf and set it down. We'll need a coat that can pass as ordinary, he said. Something a gate guard won't remember 5 seconds after seeing it. I can do forgettable, Lira said, eyeing the cloth. The trick is to make it unremarkable in every detail. No distinctive buttons, no unusual cut. But the seams. She ran her fingers along the fabric, already mapping lines in her mind. We can hide the changing points along the back, where the eye doesn't linger. Adjust shoulder width, spine curvature. Cloth is very accommodating if you treat it with respect. Paper is less forgiving, Corin said. But it remembers better. He laid out a sheet next to the cloth, the fresh hinge glyph still drying. If we place glyphs along inner panels, he mused, they can fold and flex, encouraging the cloth into new shapes. The curse, he bit off the rest. She pretended not to hear the stumble. The glyphs will act like bones, she said instead. My seams like muscles. He raised an eyebrow. You have a very anatomical view of clothing. I spent years watching garments being used as armor, as bait, as theater, she said. A dress can expose a throat as easily as it can cover it. Clothes have more power than we admit. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. So do pages. They worked in silence for a while, measuring, cutting, sketching patterns. Their hands brushed once as they reached for the same piece of chalk. Both froze, then drew back. "Sorry," Lira said quickly. "It's fine," he replied, perhaps a little too fast. The contact had been brief, skin against skin, his papery texture against her warm, calloused fingers. The difference between them felt suddenly very stark, as if he were more artifact than man. She seemed to sense the thought. "May I?" she asked quietly, holding out her hand. He frowned. "May you what?" "Look," she said. "Properly. At your hand. The curse, I want to understand what it does. For our calculations. If that's all right." He hesitated, then extended his hand slowly. She took it gently, turning it palm up. Her fingers were careful, respectful, like a tailor handling a delicate fabric. Her thumb brushed the thin, pale skin at the base of his thumb. It didn't hurt, exactly, but it sent a strange shiver through him, like a gust moving across an open book. "It's beautiful," she said, sounding surprised. He blinked. "That is not the word people usually choose." "It's precise," she clarified. "The way the texture shifts isn't random. It follows the lines of strain. Here." She traced faint ridges that ran along the back of his hand. "As if the magic is reinforcing points of pressure, even as it transforms you." "That's a very optimistic interpretation," he murmured. She released his hand gently. "If the curse strengthens what it changes, we'll need to factor that into our work," she said. "Your glyphs might be more durable than you realize." "And more dangerous," he countered. "Yes," she said. "But also, more reliable, once we understand them." He flexed his fingers, feeling the ghost of her touch lingering there. "You're very calm about all this. If I stop moving, I'll remember that Master Calder will eventually notice his favorite tool is missing," she said with forced lightness. "And then panic will catch up. Then we will move," he said. "And we will build something he would never approve of." She smiled, small but real. "Now that's a comforting thought." They worked until the candle burned low, drawing lines, adjusting patterns, arguing over the placement of glyphs versus seams. Somewhere in the middle of debating whether the collar should be reinforced with paper or left purely cloth, Lira yawned so widely she nearly stabbed herself with a pin. "That's enough for tonight," Corin said firmly. "You should sleep." "Where?" she asked. "On your rack of precious glyphs." He glanced up to the loft. "There's a pallet upstairs. Left from before." She followed his gaze, then looked back at him. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "You already have," he said, then softened the words with a faint smile. "But it would be cruel to send you out now. The patrols are still out, and you're barely standing." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," she said again, the words quieter now, heavier. He showed her up the narrow stairs. The loft was cramped but clean, with a simple bedroll and a small trunk. Dust motes floated in the air, caught in the candlelight like little bits of torn paper. "This was yours?" she asked. "A long time ago," he said. "You may use it. I'll sleep downstairs." "You could lock me in," she said lightly. "Just in case I decide to run off with your secrets." "I doubt you could carry them all," he said. "And besides, my secrets have a habit of following people who try to leave them behind." She looked at him for a long moment, something thoughtful in her gaze. "Good night, Corin," she said softly. "Good night, Lira." He descended the stairs and settled himself on the small bench under the window, pulling a thin blanket over his knees. The coat pattern lay spread on the table, half marked, half mysterious. The sheet with the hinge glyph glimmered faintly in the dimness. The atelier was no longer silent. It had the feeling of a story beginning to write itself. As his eyes drifted shut, he thought he heard the faintest rustle from the coat fabric, as if the cloth were sighing in anticipation. Paper and cloth. Bones and muscle. Risk and hope. He fell asleep with his hand resting on the unfinished pattern, and the curse did not press any tighter that night. Not yet. In the loft above, Lira lay awake a little longer, listening to the creaks of an old building and the slow, steady rhythm of someone else's breathing. For the first time since she had left Master Calder's house, she did not feel entirely alone. Down on the work table, the drawn hinge glyph shivered once, so subtly no human eye could have seen it. A line thickened, ever so slightly. If ink could dream, it might have been dreaming of movement. A whisper, no louder than a breath, brushed the edge of the pattern. Remember, it almost said. Then the workshop settled into quiet, holding its secrets between paper and lace, waiting for morning. Morning light filtered through the warped window, soft and dusty, settling across Corin's worktable and the half-finished coat. The cloth looked unassuming, grey, sturdy, dull. Precisely what a person hoping to go unseen might wear. Nothing about it suggested the risk, the potential, the untested magic waiting to be stitched and inked into its seams. Lira descended the loft stairs quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile paper talismans hanging near the rafters. Her hair was loosely braided now, the marks of sleep still softening her features. She paused at the bottom step when she saw Corin already awake, seated at the table with a cup of tea cooling at his elbow. "You rise early," she said. "I didn't sleep much," he replied, not looking up from the notes he was scribbling. His pen scratched steadily, insistently, as if racing to capture thoughts before they dissolved. "These glyphs won't design themselves." Lira's lips curved. "You're very dedicated for someone who claims to be reluctant." "Reluctance and responsibility are not mutually exclusive," he muttered. She approached the table, noticing the parchment before him filled with interconnected glyph patterns branching like a bird skeleton. "Are these all for the coat?" "I'm refining hinge behavior," he said. "Your idea of using seams as muscle control is workable. But paper responds differently than cloth. It wants to fold sharply. Cloth prefers curves." "Just like people," she said lightly. He blinked at her, unsure whether that was meant as a joke. She moved past him to the coat, laying it flat and smoothing the fabric with practiced hands. "If you anchor your glyphs here and here," she traced the inner seams of the shoulders, "I can build channels that encourage controlled shifting. Nothing dramatic. A slightly broader frame, a softened silhouette. Small changes." "Small changes are harder to maintain," he warned. "A spell that adjusts everything is easier than one that adjusts only exactly what you intend." "Precision is what separates tailors from costumers," she replied. "I'll stitch every thread by hand." He watched her fingers work, marking imaginary lines across the cloth. Her touch was confident, steady, almost reverent. He envied that steadiness. His own fingers twitched with the fear of making one wrong stroke. "Corin," she said softly, "can you hand me the chalk?" He reached for the small stick of yellow chalk. When she took it, her fingers brushed his again, a fleeting connection, warm meeting cool. She didn't withdraw quickly this time. She let the contact linger half a heartbeat before drawing back to sketch the first seam lines. They worked in close orbit for hours. Lira pinned, marked, folded. Corin drew glyphs on thin paper strips, each one pulsing faintly with restrained magic. He cut them into shapes designed to nestle invisibly within the coat's lining. At one point, Corin stepped back to study their progress, rubbing his jaw. "It's still too unstable. When the hinges flex, the cloth may resist." "We can reinforce with interfacing," she said. "Something flexible but firm." "What about the curse?" he asked quietly. "If I shape the glyphs too precisely, they'll cling to me. The more organized the spell, the more it wants a master." She paused, her fingers resting lightly on the coat. "Then I'll share the mastery." "How?" he asked, taken aback. "By flanking your glyphs with stabilizing stitches," she said. "If we design the coat so neither craft works alone, the magic won't recognize a single owner. It will answer to the garment itself." Corin stared at her. "That's unheard of," he said. "Hybrid constructs always default to a dominant caster." "Maybe because no one ever tried genuine collaboration," she said, meeting his eyes. He looked away first, unable to hold her steady gaze. The idea was dangerous. Brilliant. Terrifying. Before he could argue further, the door rapped twice in a sharp pattern, 3 knocks, a pause, then one final knock. Corin stiffened. "Rebel code," he said under his breath. "Siren." He opened the door just enough for her to slip in. Her cloak was dusted with morning frost, her eyes alert. "You two look busy," she said, looking at the coat spread across the table. "Good. Because I brought you a test subject. You were not supposed to bring anyone yet, Corin snapped. Cyrene ignored him and motioned toward the street. A young man shuffled inside, nervous, lanky, with hair that stuck up like it had been pulled too many times. He clutched a courier's satchel to his chest. This is Fen, Cyrene said. He needs to pass through the north checkpoint today. They've tightened inspections again. Lira stepped forward. Fen, she said kindly, what happens if you don't make it through? Fen swallowed. I'm delivering messages to the families evacuated last month. They're waiting on word that their people are safe. Corin ran a hand over his face. And you expect us to test an unproven enchantment on him? Cyrene folded her arms. I expect you to do your best work. He could be suffocated by a collapsing seam, Corin shot back. Or immobilized. Or worse. Lira touched his arm lightly. We're not putting it on him yet, she said. Let's test activation without a wearer first. Corin nodded, tension easing a fraction. They positioned the coat on a mannequin, a plain wooden shape in the corner. Lira stood at one side, Corin at the other. Cyrene and Fen watched from a cautious distance. Lira inhaled slowly. Ready. Corin pressed his fingers to the glyph strip sewn into the lining. The curse pulsed, a faint tightening around his knuckles. The ink responded eagerly, glowing faintly as it awakened. The cloth rippled. The shoulder seams shifted subtly, adjusting their fall as if the mannequin had grown broader. The collar dipped, altering the neckline. The sleeves rotated forward, reshaping the silhouette. The coat changed. It worked. Lira laughed a sudden, bright sound. We did it. Corin let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It's stable, he murmured. It's actually. Before he could finish, the coat shivered again. All by itself. It wasn't the simple flecks of cloth responding to magic. This was different, too smooth, too intentional, like a creature adjusting its position. Lira's smile faded. Corin, did you activate it again? No, he said quietly. The coat lifted its collar slightly, almost like a person tilting their chin. Fen squeaked and ducked behind Cyrene. It's fine, Corin said quickly, stepping forward. It's just residual motion. Hybrid enchantments sometimes echo their initial intent. That looked like more than an echo, Cyrene said. Lira approached the coat cautiously. Do you understand me? She whispered, feeling ridiculous even as she said it. The coat remained still. Corin reached out, laying a flat palm on the fabric. He pushed stabilizing energy through the glyphs, urging them toward inertness. The coat sagged, returning to its ordinary shape. Not sentient, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Just, responsive. For now, Cyrene muttered. Corin shot her a warning look. We continue carefully. No assumptions. Lira touched the coat's hem. It reacted to success, she said softly. Like it wanted to do more. Corin didn't respond. He couldn't trust his voice. They spent the rest of the morning refining the enchantments. They tested activation again, slower this time. The coat obeyed, but not without a subtle undercurrent of personality, a faint hum as though listening for instruction. Near midday, Fen stepped forward hesitantly. Can I try it now? Not yet, Corin said immediately. Yes, Lira said at the same time, but quickly amended, only after we anchor one last stabilizer stitch. Corin exhaled. Lira, this isn't. We designed it for people like him, she said. If we test it on ourselves, our crafting biases will influence the magic. We built it for a courier's needs. Let it learn from a courier. Learn? Cyrene repeated sharply. Lira winced at her choice of word. Corin scrubbed a hand over his face. Fen. If anything feels wrong, you remove the coat immediately. Do you understand? Fen nodded vigorously. Lira helped him slip into the garment. It settled over his shoulders like any ordinary coat, though Corin noticed a slight tightening at the collar, as if the cloth were assessing its new wearer. Activate it, Cyrene said. Corin and Lira exchanged a look, fear mingled with pride, with responsibility, with something unnamed. Together, they triggered the spell. Fen gasped. His outline shifted subtly, his shoulders a little narrower, his jawline softened, his height altered by the faintest fraction. He wasn't unrecognizable, but he was unquestionably different. Cyrene circled him slowly. "That'll do," she said. "A guard wouldn't look twice." Fen grinned, amazed. "I feel warm. Like the coat is hugging me." "That is not intentional," Corin muttered. But Lira touched the coat thoughtfully. "It's responding to comfort. Not dangerous yet." Cyrene clapped Fen on the back. "Get moving. And don't dawdle. The longer you wear magic, the more unpredictable it gets." Fen hurried out, cradling his courier satchel. Cyrene followed, pausing only to give Corin and Lira a look that was equal parts warning and gratitude. When they were alone again, Corin slumped against the table. "This is already more volatile than I wanted." "And more successful," Lira said gently. He looked at her, really looked. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, her smile small but real. She was exhilarated not by the danger, but by the possibility. "You were right," he admitted quietly. "A shared craft tempers the magic." She tucked a loose curl behind her ear. "We make a good team." His breath caught unexpectedly. He turned away, pretending to organize brushes. "We should rest," he said, though his pulse refused to calm. "Then begin a second prototype." Lira hesitated. "Corin." He paused but didn't look at her. "I know you fear what your magic can do," she said softly. "But today, you made something that helped someone walk safely through a city that wants to crush him." The words hit him harder than any spell. She stepped closer, not touching him but close enough that he could feel her warmth. "No matter what happens next, that matters." He swallowed, his voice low. "And if it goes wrong? Then we will fix it," she said. Together. They worked late again, side by side, refining patterns and adjusting glyphs. The atelier hummed with shared focus. Twice their hands brushed, once their shoulders touched when they leaned over the same sketch. Neither pulled away as quickly as before. The coat sat quietly on the mannequin, still and watchful. Hours later, when fatigue finally wrapped around them, Corin extinguished the lanterns and glanced toward the mannequin one last time. The coat's hem shifted ever so slightly. A small, silent movement. Almost like a bow. He shivered. But when he met Lyra's eyes, he found steadiness there, an anchor he hadn't expected. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "Tomorrow," he echoed. They went to their separate resting places. The workshop remained awake long after, holding shadows and whispered magic between its wooden bones. And somewhere inside the coat's stitched seams, something faint and new stirred, listening. Snow came early to Evrelin that year. It arrived as a thin, drifting curtain, settling in the alley cracks and on the warped roofs of the textile district. Flakes whispered against the atelier window, blurring the world outside into grays and soft shapes. Inside, ink dried and threads tangled, and the air smelled faintly of hot tea and beeswax and the nervous, electric scent of new magic. Fen returned just before dusk, stamping snow from his boots, one hand tucked protectively over the coat. "You're back," Lira said, relief softening her shoulders. "You're in one piece." "Two pieces, if you count the satchel," Fen said, forcing a grin. "Three, if you include the coat. But yes. Alive." Cyrene followed close behind him, her expression guarded but satisfied. "The north checkpoint didn't even blink," she said. "He walked through like any errand boy." "That is exactly what I am," Fen protested weakly. "But today, you were a different errand boy," Cyrene replied. "The guard who usually remembers every face barely glanced at you." Corin's tension eased slightly. "Any complications?" he asked, not daring to phrase the question more specifically. Fen hesitated. His hand tightened on the coat's lapel. "It was fine," he said. "Mostly. It just didn't like being asked to change back at first." Lyra's brows knit. "Didn't like?" Fen glanced between them, then shrugged the coat off carefully and laid it on the table as if it were a sleeping animal. "I tried to deactivate it after I left the checkpoint," he said. "But it felt stubborn. Like it wanted to keep me as I was. Took a few tries." Corin stepped closer, examining the coat's seams. The glyphs lay dormant, no visible glow, no visible disturbance. Did you hear anything? He asked quietly. Voices, whispers, anything that didn't come from your own thoughts? Fenn's throat bobbed. Maybe. I don't know. It was like standing in a crowded room where everyone's murmuring but you can't quite catch the words. Not loud. Just there. A chill slid down Corin's spine. He felt the curse stir, as if recognizing a familiar pattern. It's learning, he said under his breath. Lira touched the coat lightly. Or we're reading too much into natural feedback. Early enchantments often feel strange to first-time wearers. Early enchantments don't typically resist being turned off, Corin said. Cyrene leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Then we build another, she said. These things always go smoother the second time. Corin shot her an incredulous look. That's not how cursed hybrid craft works. Maybe not in your old order, she replied. But out here, we adapt. The coat did what we needed. That's more than most magic can say. Fenn nodded. Those families got their messages, he said. If you could see their faces. The words hit Corin harder than the coat's subtle movements. Faces, relieved, hopeful, no longer wondering if their loved ones had vanished into the city's cracks. He remembered other faces, from long ago, twisted in fear as Inkborn lumbered past. How many more couriers need disguises? Lira asked quietly. Dozens, Cyrene said. Maybe more. Lira looked at Corin. He could see the conflict in her eyes as clearly as he felt it in his chest. If we refine the design, she said slowly, perhaps we can limit the attitude the garments develop. Corin let out a slow breath. We'll need better anchors, he said. And more precise emotional boundaries during casting. Emotional boundaries? Cyrene repeated. Magic fed by emotion responds to it, Corin said. If we're reckless, angry, frightened, desperate, it seeps into the spell. The coat's stubbornness might be a mirror of the stubbornness we poured into making it work. Lyra's cheeks colored faintly. We were, admittedly, very determined. Cyrene snorted. I find it fitting that a rebellious garment helps rebels. That rebellious garment could someday decide it knows better than its wearer, Corin replied sharply. And that's when safety ends. Cyrene sobered. How do we prevent that? Corin's gaze drifted to the far wall, where sketches of long-forgotten constructs hung. We don't pour ourselves into the next one, he said. Not so deeply. We build something functional, not personal. He didn't look at Lira when he said it, but he felt her flinch beside him, almost imperceptibly. Functional, she repeated. Right. They agreed to keep the coat in the atelier for observation, at least for a time. Cyrene left with Fenn, giving the garment one last wary glance before closing the door behind them. The workshop quieted. Lira traced the collar seam with a fingertip. Do you really think we can make something powerful without investing ourselves? She asked. We have to try, Corin said. The coat's sentience, however faint, is a warning. If we repeat whatever we did, but on a larger scale. He trailed off. The memory of Inkborn stomping through burning streets rose unbidden, their bodies etched in glyphs so dense they looked like tattooed statues. We'll be careful, she said. More careful. Careful doesn't erase danger, he murmured. No, she said. But it makes it worth facing. They spent the next days designing a new garment as different from the coat as possible while serving the same purpose. A cloak instead, Lira said, sketching flowing lines on parchment. Less structural pressure on the body. Easier to adapt across different heights, genders, builds. A pattern of movement rather than shape. A cloak, Corin echoed. The word tasted like history. Cloaks had been staples of old order work, symbols of anonymity, protection, concealment. He forced his hand to steady as he drew complement glyphs to fit Lira's design. This time, he kept his strokes calm, clinical, refusing to let fear or pride seep too deeply into the ink. Lira watched him once, then deliberately turned away whenever his jaw tensed, humming under her breath as she worked her stitches. Neither of them said aloud that they were trying to keep their hearts out of the magic, as if that were even possible. On the third night, snow heavy on the eaves, someone pounded on the door. Corin stiffened. The pattern of the knocks was wrong, too loud, too authoritative to belong to Cyrene. He snatched up a warded page and slammed it against the doorframe, activating a muffling charm that dampened sound and blurred outlines. Through the warped window, he saw a shadowed figure in a heavy cloak, flanked by two others bearing the distinct insignia of the tailors' consortium, twin needles crossed over a spool. "Open in the name of the City Council and the Tailors' Guild," a smooth voice called. "We are conducting a search." Lira went pale. "Master Calder," she whispered. Corin's blood ran cold. He stepped close to her, instinctively placing himself between her and the door. "How did he find you?" he hissed. "He didn't," she said, eyes wide. "He followed what he owns." Her gaze dropped briefly to the satchel, still hanging from a peg by the wall. Her old guild crest was stitched discreetly on the underside of the flap, thread that probably carried tracking enchantments. "I should have burned it," she breathed. The pounding grew louder. "We have a warrant," Calder called. His voice was clear, cultivated, carrying easily even through the muffling charm. "This district shelters dangerous elements. Paper magic remnants. Runaway property." Lira flinched at the word. "You are not property," Corin said, low and fierce. "That's not how he sees it," she replied. Another set of knocks from the back alley door, this time the quick, coded rhythm that meant Cyrene. Corin moved swiftly, motioning for Lira to stay out of sight behind a stack of paper crates. He cracked the back door just enough to admit Cyrene's hand as she pushed a folded scrap of paper through the gap. "Calder's got a full retinue," her hurried scrawl read. "He's been asking after a runaway apprentice and a forbidden atelier. I can't keep him away much longer." Corin crumpled the note, his mind racing. "He's not allowed to search without cause," Lira whispered. "Even guild masters have limits." "He claims to have cause," Corin said grimly. "Your absence. My existence." The curse tingled along his arms, responding to his rising fear like ink meeting water. "We can't let him see the coat," Lira said. "Or the cloak. He'll recognize the hybrid craft in an instant." Corin's gaze darted toward the mannequin, where the coat hung with quiet, unsettling composure. The almost finished cloak lay draped over a chair nearby, its fabric shimmering faintly under the influence of partially set glyphs. "Help me," he said. Together, they moved quickly. Lira snatched up the cloak, bundling it into an innocuous roll of cloth and shoving it under the floorboard compartment Corin had built long ago. Corin took the coat and pressed it flat onto the table, layering blank sheets of paper over it, then heavier boards, turning it into an unremarkable stack. The coat did not like it. He felt the faintest resistance as he folded it, a subtle stiffness in the fabric that hadn't been there before. For an instant, the collar tugged against his hand. "Stay," he hissed under his breath, hating how ridiculous he sounded. The coat went still. The pounding escalated to outright hammering. The doorframe shuddered. "I know you're in there," Calder called. "My trackers followed my property's trail directly to your threshold. Open this door, or I will have it broken down and the occupants charged with obstruction." Lira's fingers dug into the edge of the table. "If he sees me," she whispered, "he'll invoke guild rights. He'll drag me back in chains if he must." Corin's jaw clenched. "Let him try," he said. "That will only make things worse for you," she replied desperately. "For the rebels. He has influence." "So do I," said a voice inside Corin that he barely recognized. "Just a different kind." He reached for the charm that controlled the ward and carefully, reluctantly, let it drop. The sound rushed in, cold air following as he opened the door. Master Routh Calder stood framed in the entryway like a portrait hung in a gallery. His cloak was immaculate, deep navy lined with white fur, his hair silvered at the temples in a way that looked intentionally distinguished rather than aged. His eyes were a piercing blue, assessing everything at once. Beside him, two guild enforcers in tailored leather and enchanted pins stood ready, eyes scanning the interior. Calder's gaze flicked over Corin, taking in his simple, ink-stained garments, the stacks of paper, the faintly glowing glyphs hung innocently to dry. "Corin Vale," he said smoothly. "Unless my records are wrong." Corin's mouth went dry. "They're not," he said. "It's been Some time since your name was on the lips of anyone important, Calder continued, tone almost conversational. And yet here you are, still dabbling in your little pages. This is a licensed bookbinding shop, Corin lied. Calder's eyes sharpened. Do not insult me. I know the difference between ledger ink and spell glyphs. His gaze swept the room again. I am here for my property. Your what? Corin asked, already knowing the answer. My apprentice, Calder said. Lira Fenwick. She has absconded with guild resources and broken her terms of apprenticeship. She is in violation of several agreements and owes the consortium years of service. She owes you nothing, Corin said, the words out before he could temper them. Calder's smile was thin. Interesting that you feel qualified to weigh in on obligations, outlaw that you are. The enforcers shifted subtly, hands resting on their belt tools, the tailor's equivalent of weapons. I have tracked her signature to this place, Calder said. She will come with me, and I will overlook your unsanctioned existence. For now. Lira stepped out from behind the crates. No, she said. Her voice was steady, if quiet. Calder's gaze snapped to her, taking in every detail in a heartbeat. Lira, he said, in a tone that might have sounded paternal to anyone not standing between them. You've caused quite a lot of trouble for a girl who's been given everything. You gave me a prison, she said. A path, he corrected. A place in a guild that values your talent. You are not yet in a position to judge the shape of the cage when you have not seen the wild. I have seen enough, she said. His eyes flicked to the satchel on the peg. You took guild tools, he said lightly. I could charge you with theft. Then add this to the list, she said, drawing herself up. I refuse to return. The air crackled. Calder's smile did not waver, but something cold entered his gaze. Refusal is not an option, he said. Your contract, Corin cut in, is with a person, not a bolt of fabric. She has the right to say no. Calder turned that cold gaze on him. You dare lecture me on rights, mage? Corin felt the word like a slap. Mage. Not binder, not craftsman. A name associated with crimes, not craft. You have no jurisdiction here, Corin said. This is not a guild hall. The law bends where guilds lean, Calder interrupted. Surely you recall that from the days your order still had a seat at the table. He flicked his fingers at the enforcers. Search, he said. Lira, if you come quietly, I will give these men no reason to be rough. The enforcers stepped forward. Lira moved instinctively closer to Corin, almost brushing his arm. Her nearness sent a sharp, protective instinct through him, stronger than fear. Don't touch her, he said quietly. The nearest enforcer sneered. And what will you do, parchment skin? Fold yourself into a protest? The curse surged at the insult, as if wanting to prove something. Corin's palm itched to draw a quick restraining glyph. He could immobilize one of them, maybe both, long enough for Lira to slip away. And what then? His conscience answered. More violence. More fear. More reason for Calder to call him a threat. Lira reached subtly for his sleeve, fingers brushing the fabric like an anchor. Corin, she murmured. Don't. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw a plea not for him to abandon her, but for him to trust her. I will not come back to your house, she said to Calder. But I will show you something, if you stay your men. Calder tilted his head, curiosity pricking through his anger. You presume to make conditions. I presume to demonstrate the value of what you're chasing, she said. And why you can't have it. He hesitated a fraction, calculating. Then he gestured lazily. The enforcers halted, though they did not relax. Lira released Corin's sleeve and stepped toward the table. You taught me that the world is a stage, she said to Calder. Clothing is performance. Glamour. Illusion. She took the coat from beneath the paper sheets with careful hands, revealing it like a magician drawing away a cloth. This, she said, is not illusion. Calder's eyes narrowed. What is it? A collaboration, she said. Between cloth and something you attempted to erase. Corin's heart stuttered. Lira, he said under his breath, horrified. We can't hide forever, she whispered back. Better to choose the terms. She held up the coat. Watch, she said. Without waiting for Corin's activation, she slipped into the garment herself and pressed her hand to the inner lining. Her pulse thrummed under her skin. The curse tingled in Corin's bones in sympathetic resonance. The glyphs awoke. Lyra's posture shifted, her shoulders broadening subtly, her chin tilting at a slightly different angle. Her cheekbones seemed sharper, her mouth a little narrower. She became, in essence, someone else. Calder's eyes widened despite himself. Impressive, he murmured. A structural disguise. Crude, perhaps, but... He broke off. Because the coat moved again. This time, the change was not simply structural. The coat's hem flared, then settled as if adjusting its own balance. The collar rose, framing Lyra's altered face theatrically before lowering again to a more modest line. The fabric rolled across her shoulders like a shrug. Calder's nostrils flared. "That is not your work alone," he said. "No," Lyra said. "It is ours." She touched the coat affectionately. "Stand down," she whispered to it, barely audible. Obediently, the enchantment softened. Lyra's features returned to normal, the coat relaxing around her. It almost radiated something like satisfaction. Calder stepped forward, fascinated. "The garment responds to speech," he said. "A semi-autonomous enchantment. You risked consciousness in hybrid craft." His gaze snapped to Corin. "You utter fool," he breathed. "Do you have any idea what this could do?" "Yes," Corin said hoarsely. "Which is why it must be contained. Carefully. Ethically." Calder's expression shifted rapidly through disbelief, awe, calculation. "Ethics are the luxury of those not sitting on the edge of revolution," he said. "The council would pay a fortune for such garments. Imagine a guard's ability to infiltrate rebels. Or a dignitary's need to slip away from assassins. This is beyond tailoring. Beyond papercraft. Beyond control," Corin said. "Which is why it should not be placed in the hands of those who see everything as a tool." Calder's eyes glinted. "I see opportunity," he said. "While you wallow in guilt." He looked at Lyra. "Come back with me," he said. "Bring your notes. We can perfect this in a safe environment. You know as well as I do that he jerked his chin at Corin, can't protect you from what will happen when the authorities learn of this. With my backing, you could be the most sought-after enchanter in the kingdom." Lyra's fingers tightened on the coat. Corin saw the flicker of temptation, a chance to work without hiding, to have resources, tools, recognition for her skill. Calder wasn't lying about that part. "Safe," she repeated. "You call your house safe?" "Safer than an outlaw's attic," he said. "Safer than rebel dens and illegal workshops." "I would be an asset," she said. "A commodity." "You would be important," he corrected. She shook her head slowly. "I would be owned." Calder's mouth thinned. "You speak like a child who doesn't understand how the world works." "I understand it very well," she said quietly. "That's why I left." She glanced at Corin, then back at Calder. "You cannot have this garment," she said. "Or any like it. Not while you see people as pieces on a board." Calder's eyes cooled to ice. "Then you force my hand," he said. He snapped his fingers. The enforcers surged forward. Corin moved without thinking. He grabbed a warded sheet from the wall and flung it between Lyra and the advancing men. Glyphs flared, a sudden barrier of air thickening like glass. The first enforcer slammed into it with a curse, his momentum halted. The second went for Corin himself, hands outstretched to seize. Corin's curse sang through his veins. He dragged his thumb across the page, activating a localized bind. The enforcer's hands froze mid-air, fingers twitching uselessly. White pain lanced up Corin's arm. He hissed, stumbling back as his skin tightened, the papery texture advancing another fraction up his wrist. Lyra reached for him instinctively. "Corin." "I'm fine," he ground out, though his head spun. Calder glared at the barrier, fascinated and enraged. "You cling to obsolete tricks," he said. "You can't hold us forever. Long enough," Cyrene's voice called from the back door, "for you to rethink barging into my district with threats." She stepped inside, flanked by 2 of her own. They weren't as polished as Calder's enforcers, but they moved with the loose confidence of people who'd fought their way out of more than one tight corner. "This is a private residence," Cyrene said. "Council warrant or not, you're stirring trouble in a district that manages its own." Calder's lip curled. "Rabble dictating terms now?" "Rabble with eyes," Cyrene replied calmly. "We saw your men manhandling residents. That doesn't endear you. You'd throw your lot in with a cursed mage and a runaway apprentice?" Calder demanded. Cyrene glanced at Corin and Lira, then back. "They're making things that keep my people alive," she said. "You make gala costumes that hide bribes." Lira's heart jolted at the unexpected defense. "Leave," Cyrene continued. "Take your enforcers. File your complaints. But if you try to drag anyone out of this district without cause again, you'll find your guild house short a few clients." The threat was subtle but real. Calder's influence was strong, but the tailors relied on merchant money, and the merchants relied on the people Cyrene helped move unseen. Everything was woven together more tightly than guild masters liked to admit. Calder's jaw clenched. He looked at Lira, then at the coat, at Corin, at the ward humming gently in the air. "This is not over," he said. "You are playing with forces you cannot control. When it breaks, I won't be there to pick up the pieces." "Good," Corin said quietly. "We'll mend it ourselves." Calder turned sharply, signaling his enforcers. Corin released the bind with a pained sigh. The men shook out their hands, shooting him murderous looks. They followed their master out into the snow without another word. The moment the door closed, the room sagged with released tension. Cyrene let out a long breath. "Well," she said. "He's as charming as they say." Lyra's legs felt suddenly unsteady. She leaned against the table, her hand brushing the coat's sleeve. It felt warmer than it should. "Are you all right?" Corin asked, stepping close. His eyes searched hers, concern etched in every line of his face. She nodded, then shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "He shouldn't have seen the coat. I shouldn't have shown him." "You bought us a moment," Cyrene said. "Sometimes that's all we can do." She eyed the garment thoughtfully. "But he's right about one thing," she added. "This is going to draw attention. You either disappear completely, or you double down and get ahead of it." "Those are terrible options," Corin muttered. "Welcome to my life," Cyrene said. She left soon after, needing to tend to her network, leaving Corin and Lira alone with the coat and their shaken breaths. Silence stretched. "You risked yourself," Corin said at last, voice low. "Standing up to him like that. You didn't have to." She looked at him, tired but steady. "You opened the door," she said slowly. "You built the magic that saved Fen. You used your curse to hold back his enforcers so I wouldn't be dragged away. You think I'd stand behind you and say nothing?" He swallowed. "I don't want you hurt because of me. And I don't want you folded into some silent monument to regret," she said. "So we're at an impasse." Her tone was light, but her eyes shone faintly, something raw and fiercely protective beneath the humor. His chest ached. "You're more than this curse," she said quietly. "More than the Order's mistakes. You're good, Corin. Even when it costs you." He felt something inside him tilt, like paper being turned toward the light. "And you're more than his apprentice," he replied, the words surprising him with their urgency. "More than a name in his ledger. You have this mind, this way of seeing seams where everyone else sees walls." Calder would have caged that until it only served his ends. She blinked rapidly. "You really believe that?" "Yes," he said simply. Something in her eased at that. Her shoulders dropped, her lips parting on a breath that sounded almost like relief. "Then we keep going," she said. "We refine the cloak. We watch the coat. We stay ahead of whatever is stirring here." She laid her hand over the coat's chest. The garment shifted faintly under her touch. Not a twitch, not a structural adjustment. Something like recognition. "You feel it too," Corin said. "Yes," she whispered. "It's listening." They agreed, reluctantly, to keep the coat active for observation. Over the next few days, they noticed patterns. The coat tightened protectively when someone approached wearing guild insignia, even if Corin hadn't consciously activated any defensive runes. It grew heavier when worn by someone anxious, as if anchoring them. Once, when Lira accidentally pricked her finger while mending a sleeve, the coat's cuff rolled down toward her hand, almost as if trying to cover the bead of blood. "It's mimicking care," Corin said, unsettled. "As if it learned from our intentions." "Care is not a bad thing to mimic," Lira replied. But she, too, watched it with wary eyes. The cloak, meanwhile, neared completion. Unlike the coat, it was designed with stricter limitations, fewer adaptive glyphs, more rigid stitching patterns. It would alter silhouettes less dramatically but with more predictability. They had one rule: they wouldn't test it on anyone alone. Any activation would be done together, balanced by both their crafts, observed by Cyrene. On the evening before the test, snow had piled high enough to mute the city sounds. The atelier felt suspended, wrapped like a parcel awaiting delivery. Lira stood by the cloak, smoothing the fabric thoughtfully. "We should name it," she said. Corin blinked. "Name it?" She nodded. Calder always said the most powerful garments had names. Not for the clients. For the tailors. It helped us understand what we were making. "This is not a pet," Corin protested. "Naming it edges us closer to treating it like a person." She shrugged one shoulder. "We already talk about it like it has moods," she said. "Might as well admit what we're doing." He frowned. "And what are we doing?" "Giving form to something that wants to exist," she said softly. "But on our terms, we hope." He looked at the cloak. It hung on its stand like a promise, its fabric dark and subtle, its interior lined with careful, almost invisible glyphwork. A thing poised between tool and something more. "If we name it," he said slowly, "we risk giving it identity. And things with identity tend to want more." She considered that. "True," she said. "But names also define boundaries. They say, you are this and not that. Maybe that will help contain it." He almost laughed. "Trust a tailor to think of names as seams." She smiled faintly. "It's all cutting and shaping, in the end." He hesitated, then stepped closer, too aware of the way her presence warmed the air. "What would you name it?" he asked. She studied the garment for a long moment. "It's meant for passing through eyes unnoticed," she said. "For slipping through gatherings and gates. For wearing faces like masks." Her fingers brushed the edge of the hood. "But it also feels proud. Like it wants to be seen even as it hides." "Contradictory," he said. "Like its makers." "Exactly," she murmured, then exhaled. "Masquerade," she decided. "It's a truthful lie. Mask on top, truth underneath." He rolled the word on his tongue. "Masquerade cloak," he said. The fabric shivered. Lira and Corin both froze. "That could have been draft from the window," Corin said weakly. There was no draft. The shutters were shut tight against the snow. "We've crossed the line," Lira whispered. "It likes the name." That is not a reassuring sentence. "Neither is I built sentient hybrid constructs and all I got was this nervous breakdown," she retorted, but her hand tightened in the cloth. He laid his palm on a glyph near the collar, trying to feel the magic as he always had, dispassionately, analytically. Instead he felt something like a tension, turned outward and inward at once. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow we test it. With Cyrene present. And then we decide how far we will let this go." "And if it goes too far?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked, taking in the worry lines at the corners of her mouth, the determination in her eyes, the stubborn set of her shoulders that he'd come to recognize as both endearing and terrifying. "Then we end it," he said quietly. "Whatever that takes." She nodded. That night, he dreamed of parchment rivers and fabric reefs, weaving and folding around each other. In the dream, a cloak danced through them, changing shape with every step. It had no face, but it turned toward him. "Remember," it whispered in a voice that sounded unsettlingly like his own. He woke in the dark to find the air heavy, the curse thrumming in his blood. Up in the loft, Lira lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling. She could feel the presence of their creations below like an extra heartbeat in the house. She thought of Calder's offer, of the weight of her satchel, of the way Corin had stood between her and danger without hesitating. She thought of his hand in hers when she'd examined the curse lines, of the surprising warmth beneath paper-smooth skin. "You're more than your fear," she murmured into the quiet, though he wasn't there to hear it. Down below, in the dim workshop, the masquerade cloak stirred on its stand just slightly, as if turning in its sleep. The coat on the mannequin twitched its cuff, as if reaching for something it could not quite touch. Magic, once awakened, rarely settled back into pure, obedient silence. Morning would bring Cyrene, and tests, and decisions. But for now, in the fragile space between danger and choice, Corin and Lira breathed in rhythm, separated by one thin flaw and bound by the same unfolding story, one that their creations were now beginning to read along with them. Snow fell harder the next morning, clinging to the window panes in thick, uneven sheets. The world outside was a blur of white and soft echoes, but inside the atelier the air felt taut, drawn tight like thread pulled to its limits. Cyrene arrived before dawn, boots soaked, cloak dusted with frost. She shook the snow from her shoulders with a sharp flick and surveyed the nearly complete masquerade cloak with an expression that was part curiosity, part dread. "So that's the thing we're trusting with our lives today," she said. "It's not a thing," Lira murmured before she could stop herself. Cyrene raised a brow. "You named it, didn't you?" Corin sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "She named it. I warned her." Lira attempted to glare at him, but her unease softened it to something closer to worry. "Names give boundaries," she said. "Names give power," Cyrene countered. "And attitude, judging by the coat." All three pairs of eyes turned to the coat hanging on its mannequin. The garment had been perfectly still moments before, but now its hem swayed faintly, as though stirred by a breeze only it could feel. Corin stepped forward cautiously. The coat did not move again. "It reacts more when Lyra's near," he said quietly. "Because I helped make it," Lira said, though even she didn't sound convinced. "Or because it prefers you," Cyrene muttered. Lira flinched. Corin shot Cyrene a warning look. "We test the masquerade first," Corin said. "The coat remains inactive." Cyrene shrugged. "You're the mags," she said, though her tone was edged with nerves. They positioned the masquerade cloak on a stand in the center of the workshop. It looked regal in the morning light, dark, fluid, its edges rippling faintly like shadowed water. Lyra's stitches glimmered subtly beneath Corin's layered glyphs, threads running through ink like veins through muscle. Corin rested his fingertips lightly on the inner lining. "Activation will be slow," he said. "Gradual. We'll see how it responds." Lira stood beside him, hands trembling only slightly as she touched one of the stabilizing seams. Cyrene took several steps back. "If it lunges, I'm stabbing it," she warned. "It doesn't lunge," Corin said sharply. "You don't know that." Corin opened his mouth to argue and stopped. Because the cloak had already begun to move. It rose slightly on the stand, lifting as if inhaling. The hood tilted toward Corin, then toward Lira, like a graceful bow. Then it spoke. Not in words. Not even in sound. But the magic rippled outward in a pattern that felt like intention, brushing against Corin's thoughts like fingertips of cold air. Recognition. Lira drew a sharp breath. "Corin, I know," he whispered. The cloak did not stop there. Its hem lifted higher, curling outward like the petals of a dark flower. The glyphs pulsed in sequence, like a heartbeat learning its rhythm. Cyrene swore softly. "That's not normal." "No," Corin agreed. "It's too aware. Too fast. It shouldn't be adapting yet." "We anchored every seam," Lira said, voice tight. "We set boundaries, strict, careful boundaries. And it's rewriting them," Corin said. The cloak shimmered. Its hood turned toward Corin again, tilting slightly. Seeking. Corin backed up a step. The cloak leaned after him. "It's drawn to you," Cyrene said. Lira shook her head. "No. It's drawn to both of us. To the combination of us." Corin felt his curse flare, warning him, tugging at him. "We need to disengage it. Now." Lira touched the clasp seam, attempting the shutdown stitch. Nothing happened. She tried again. The cloak reacted with a sudden ripple, as if shuddering. "It's resisting," she said, horror spreading across her face. It's Corin, it's not obeying. Cyrene stepped forward. Do you need me to cut it? No. Corin and Lira said at once. A clean cut through active glyphwork could release the spell uncontrolled, Corin added. Cyrene froze mid-step. You should open with that next time. Corin moved cautiously toward the cloak, his breath sharp in his chest. Masquerade, he said firmly, stand down. Disengage primary function. The cloak stilled. For a moment. Then it lifted off the stand entirely. Lira gasped. Cyrene reached instinctively for her dagger. Corin reached for the nearest warded sheet. But the cloak did not attack. Instead, it floated softly, deliberately, toward Corin and draped itself over his outstretched arm like a cat settling onto a favored perch. Lira stared. Corin, it chose you. No, Corin said, breath shaking. It's reading magic signatures. I cast the glyphs. It sees me as its anchor. Anchor, Cyrene muttered. You mean master. That is not how hybrid enchantments work, Corin insisted. Seems that's exactly how this one works. Corin tried to pull his arm free. The cloak tightened, not painfully, but firmly, like a hand clasping his wrist. Let go, he said. The cloak did not let go. Lira stepped forward quickly, laying her hands on the fabric. Masquerade, she said softly, release him. The test is over. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the cloak loosened reluctantly and slipped from Corin's arm onto the floor in a graceful spill of fabric. Corin exhaled shakily. This is far beyond autonomous adjustment, he said. This is preference. Attachment. Personality, Lira whispered. Like the coat. Cyrene looked from the cloak to the coat, then back. What did you two do? Corin ran a hand through his hair. Magic reflects the mind of the maker. But two makers, two emotional inputs, may have created a complexity I didn't anticipate. Lira's voice was faint. It's not just mirroring emotion. It's forming its own. We have to shut it down, Corin said. Permanently. Lira's head snapped up. Corin. It's too unstable, he said. If Calder finds out what this can do, if anyone does, Evrelin will crumble under the weight of another uprising. Or worse. Lira hesitated. But Masquerade hasn't hurt anyone. Yet, Cyrene said grimly. Corin nodded. We end it. Today. He reached for the cloak. And it recoiled. The fabric drew back sharply, as if understanding his intention. The glyphs pulsed a deep, warning color, shifting from faint silver to storm gray. It's afraid, Lira said, her voice cracking. Corin, stop. Corin froze. Lira stepped between him and the cloak. Let me try. She knelt beside the garment, her hands gentle as she brushed a fold of fabric. Masquerade, she whispered. We're not harming you. But you must rest now. Sleep. No more movement. The cloak trembled. Corin felt its magic reaching, not just reading Lira's emotions but feeling them. Her fear. Her compassion. Her guilt. Her longing. The cloak responded with something like sorrow. A ripple passed through it, soft, slow, resigned. Then it collapsed. Completely inert. Lira bowed her head, shaking. Corin knelt beside her, his voice soft. Lira, you did it. But she wasn't listening to him. She was staring at the cloak with wet eyes. It trusted me, she whispered. And I lied. Cyrene exhaled. We need to move quickly. If Calder returns. A sharp crack split the air. The mannequin holding the coat had toppled. No, been thrown. The coat now stood on the floor, upright, as if worn by an invisible figure. Its sleeves lifted slightly. The collar flared. It was protecting the cloak. Corin stumbled to his feet. Impossible, he whispered. No construct should act independently, much less in defense of another. The coat took a step. A single, deliberate step between the humans and the cloak. Cyrene backed up instantly. Nope. Absolutely not. Burn it. Drown it. Send it to the void. The coat's headless posture straightened, affronted. It's not attacking, Lira said quickly. It's guarding. Corin's pulse thundered. They're connected, he said. They've formed a network. A relationship. Wonderful, Cyrene muttered. Your clothes are dating. Corin shot her a glare, but Lira looked strangely stricken. It learned from us, she whispered. From how we worked. How we cared. The coat shifted, as if in agreement. Then, a crash shattered the workshop window. Snow and shards of glass exploded inward. A heavy shape tumbled through the opening. A courier, bleeding, gasping, clutching his chest. Cyrene, he choked. Ambush, patrol, Calder's men, they're coming. The coat surged forward, placing itself between the courier and the broken window. Cyrene swore violently. They tracked him. They're tracking all of us. Corin's skin tightened painfully as his curse flared. Lira, he said quickly, pack the cloak. We need to leave. And the coat? She asked urgently. He looked at it, this unintended, unsettling creation standing like a sentinel. He made a choice he already knew would haunt him. It comes with us, he said. Cyrene rounded on him. Are you insane? It's dangerous. So is leaving it for Calder to dissect, he snapped. We control it, or he will. Lira grabbed his hand, warm, real, frantic. We can do this, she said. Together. He met her eyes. And in that moment, amid broken glass, falling snow, and creeping magic, they felt it. A bond. Not magical. Not forced. Human. He squeezed her hand. Together. Boots thundered outside. Voices shouted. And the coat stepped closer to them, like a soldier preparing for war. Cyrene drew her dagger. They're here, she hissed. Corin's curse rippled painfully along his arm. The cloak lay still. The coat stood ready. And everything they had feared and everything they had created was converging at their door. The uprising they had never meant to spark had begun. And now, they would have to face it. The first impact shook dust from the rafters. Corin felt it through the soles of his shoes, a dull, heavy blow against the front door. The wounded courier flinched where he lay on the floor, hand pressed to the bleeding crease at his ribs. Cyrene crouched beside him, teeth bared, dagger drawn. Patrol, she hissed. 4, maybe 5 sets of boots. Gild leather, by the sound. They're early, Lira whispered. Calder must have followed Fen. Another blow. The wood groaned. We don't have time for a stand, Cyrene said. They'll bring more if we hold them here. We can't leave him, Lira said, looking at the courier. We won't, Corin said. Back way. He crossed to the rear wall in 3 strides, fingers finding the barely visible seam of a concealed panel. Paper rustled softly as he pulled it aside, revealing a narrow passage smelling of dust and old glue. Goes to the alley behind the old press, he said. It's cramped, but... The door shuddered again, splintering. A crack of cold air lanced through the room. No time for explanations, Cyrene snapped. Move. Lira helped the courier to his feet, slinging his arm over her shoulders. Cyrene pressed her shoulder under his other arm, bearing most of his weight. Corin turned to the mannequin. Come, he said quietly. The coat stepped down. It moved with eerie grace, its empty sleeves swaying, hem dragging only slightly on the floor. For an instant, Corin thought it might refuse, plant itself like a barricade. Instead, it crossed to him and took its place at his side, as if acknowledging his call. The masquerade cloak lay limp where Lira had left it, a dark spill on the floor. Masquerade, Lira whispered, pausing, torn. Please. The cloak did not rise. Boots pounded outside, louder now. Orders barked. Corin grabbed the cloak himself, bundling it into his arms. It was heavier than it should have been, as if sulking. You can resent me later, he muttered. For now, we run. They slipped into the narrow passage just as the front door gave way with a deafening crack. The last thing Corin saw of the atelier was the scatter of glass across the floor, the spilled ink, the gentle sway of loose paper strips reacting to the cold rush of air. The little world he'd built in quiet was being trampled, and he didn't have the luxury to watch it die. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, 2 staggered through with difficulty. Lira pushed ahead as much as she dared, guiding the courier. Cyrene cursed under her breath every time his boot slipped. Corin came last, coat gliding beside him, masquerade awkward in his arms. Behind them came the sound of men swarming through his front room, overturning furniture, shouting. Where? One voice snarled. Tracks, another answered. Here. Hidden door. Corin swore softly. They burst out into a snow-choked alley. The sky above was a pale, washed-out grey. The air stabbed at lungs and eyes. This way, Cyrene said, veering right. Back lanes to the old quarter. Patrols avoid it, too many collapsed buildings. The old paper ateliers, Corin said sharply. You want to hide there? An explosion of memory, glyph-lit halls, constructs moving in formation, then flame and screams. The place where his life had broken. Their loss is our gain, Cyrene said. You said yourself no one goes there. No one sane, he muttered. Another shout rang out from the passage behind them. The pursuers had found the exit. Run, Cyrene snapped. They ran. Snow dragged at their boots. The courier stumbled often. Lira and Cyrene hauled him upright each time with grim determination. Corin's lungs burned. The curse thrummed in his veins like an over-tightened string. The coat stayed at his side, adjusting to his pace, its hem skimming clean lines in the snow. Masquerade hung heavy against his chest, unresponsive but not inert. He could feel its magic coiled like a held breath. They cut through the warren of alleys, Cyrene making sharp, instinctive choices at each junction. Voices always followed, sometimes closer, sometimes fainter, but never gone. At last, the streets began to change. The neat brick gave way to cracked stone. Windows were broken, signs hung crooked or not at all. A blackened beam jutted from the shell of a building like a bone. The air seemed thicker, heavy with a residue that wasn't quite smoke, wasn't quite dust. Corin knew this place. The old quarter of the paper order's ateliers. He slowed despite himself. The others stumbled a step before realizing. Keep moving, Cyrene urged. Corin stared at the skeletons of his past. This is where they were born, he said hoarsely. The Inkborn. The first constructs. This ground is steeped in what we're running from. And maybe, Lira said quietly, also where we can end it. He looked at her. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair windblown, her eyes fierce. She was exhausted, scared, angry, and still looking ahead instead of back. Boots sounded at the mouth of the street behind them. Cyrene's hand tightened on her dagger. No more running, she said. They'll hunt the whole district if we keep dragging this out. Better to choose the field. Corin swallowed. Fine, he said. Then we choose properly. He moved toward the central ruin, the largest of the old halls, once a proud arc of windows and a domed roof. Now the dome was gone, the windows shattered, the entrance a scorched bruise. Inside, he said. The wards here are half dead but still reactive. They might respond to me. Cyrene frowned. In a good way or a bad way? We're about to find out. They staggered into the ruin. The hall was vast and hollow, filled with scattered debris, collapsed tables, twisted metal frames, drifts of brittle paper that had survived the fire by some stubborn, unnatural means. The air smelled faintly of ashen ink, even after all these years. Corin felt the building recognize him. Not as a person, exactly, but as a pattern. The echo of glyphwork he'd once woven here resonated with the faint lines etched into the stones. He knelt, pressing his free hand to the cold floor. Wake, he whispered. Just enough to listen. Not enough to rise. Magic shivered through the hall. The drifts of paper stirred, rustling like dry leaves. Lira drew in a sharp breath. Cyrene swore under her breath again. That's not unnerving at all, she muttered. The courier slumped against a broken pillar, breathing shallow and fast. Lira tore a strip from her underskirt and pressed it harder against his wound, hands steady even as her eyes scanned the entrances. They'll be here any moment, she said. As if summoned, a voice echoed from the open doorway behind them. They, it said silkily, are already here. Master Calder stepped into the ruined hall as if onto a well-swept stage. Snow dusted his elegant cloak. Behind him, a line of armored guild enforcers fanned out, eyes sharp, weapons at the ready. He took in the scene at a glance, the wounded courier, Cyrene's stance, Lyra's pale face, the coat, the cradled cloak, and Corin kneeling with his hand on the floor. Of course, Calder said. Where else would a guilty mage flee but back to his birthplace? Lyra straightened, moving instinctively in front of the courier. He's not guilty, she said. He's trying to prevent what you're doing. Calder's gaze flicked over her, then settled on the bundle in Corin's arms. And there it is, he murmured. The crown jewel. Your masquerade. His eyes glinted. Hand it over, Vale. It belongs in capable hands. Like yours, Corin said, rising slowly. Masquerade felt heavy and strangely warm against his chest. You want to dress the council in sentient weapons and call it security? I want to stabilize this city, Calder snapped. Rebels bite at the council's heels, guilds jostle for power, and in the middle of it all, you two unveil a new kind of Inkborn and act shocked when someone notices. It's not an Inkborn, Lyra said fiercely. It's a tool. Or it was meant to be. All tools become weapons in the wrong hands, Calder said. Better it be in mine than in the hands of frightened amateurs. He lifted his hand. The enforcers raised crossbows fitted with gleaming bolts, not mere metal, Corin saw, but shafts etched with antimagic runes, designed to pierce wards and disrupt spells. Give me the cloak, Calder said. You may keep your pet coat, if you like. Consider it a mercy. At his side, the coat shifted. Between one heartbeat and the next, it stepped in front of Corin and Lyra, its sleeves outstretched, forming a thin, fabric barrier. An absurd, useless gesture. Cloth against bolts. Corin's throat tightened. No, he said roughly. This ends here. Not with them in your hands. Not with another wave of monsters walking these streets at your command. Calder's lip curled. You would rather let the rebel rabble dictate how magic is used. Please. You've always lacked the stomach for what power requires. Corin felt Lyra's shoulder brush his, solid and warm. You're wrong, she said. Calder's brows rose. About power? About him, she said. He's not weak. He's choosing to stop the same cycle you want to restart. The coat drew itself taller, as if emboldened by her words. Calder's patience snapped. Enough, he snapped. Take them. The enforcers stepped forward, bolts aimed. Corin didn't think. He acted. He wrapped Masquerade around himself like a shield and reached inside the fabric with his magic, not as a cautious craftsman but as a desperate man tearing down his own walls. The cloak came alive. It didn't wake gently, as it had in the atelier. It surged, flooding his senses with a rush of impressions, faces, silhouettes, seams, edges, possibilities. It saw him, saw Lyra, saw the enforcers, saw Calder. It saw roles. It saw the shape of a solution. It tried to take him. The magic lunged inward, reaching for his bones, his skin, his thoughts, seeking a core to wrap around, a mind to anchor itself in permanently. His curse sang in response, delighted and horrified, like two parts of the same broken machine finally aligning. Corin gasped. His vision blurred. For a dizzy moment, he saw himself not as a man but as an outline, a structure to be filled with fabric, paper, glyphs. A walking disguise. A perfect vessel. No. The thought wasn't his, and also was. He felt his skin tighten, the papery transformation racing up his arms, across his chest. His heartbeat muted, muffled by layers forming where there should be flesh. Corin. Lyra's voice cut through the fog. She grabbed his hand. Her grip was hot, human, stubbornly real. Let go, he wheezed. Get back. No, she said. You don't get to sacrifice yourself and leave me sewing up the aftermath alone. She yanked on his hand, on the curse lines themselves. Magic sparked where her touch met his changing skin, threadcraft meeting inkcraft. The cloak reeled, confused by the second anchor, by the divide. It wanted unity. It wanted one mind, one body, one clear purpose. Sharing was messy. Lyra felt it too. For a heartbeat, she saw what the cloak envisioned, a towering figure wrapped in shifting patterns, slipping through any crowd unnoticed, striking from anywhere. Not man, not garment, something between. A perfect weapon. No, she whispered to it. That is not what you were made for. The cloak's magic surged, resistant, trying to peel her grip away from Corin's hand. Threads in her fingertips burned. She clung tighter. You wanted to help, she said, voice shaking but fierce. You wanted to protect. I felt it. When you hugged Fen. When you anchored anxious wearers. That's what we poured into you. Not conquest. Protection. The cloak wavered. Bolts flew. The coat moved. It threw itself in front of them, sleeves flaring wide. Bolts slammed into its fabric and did not pierce. They sank into layers of thickened, hardened paper hidden beneath the outer cloth, glyphs flaring briefly as they absorbed the impact. Corin felt each strike as a dull ache in his chest, as if the coat's defense echoed through his own body. Over Calder's shouted orders and the enforcer's curses, Corin heard the whisper of the old atelier. Paper stirred. The drifts around the hall rose like a flock of startled birds, pages swirling, folding, snapping together into rough shapes, limbs, heads, torsos half remembered from old designs. The fallen ink-born remnants, half asleep for years, were answering the disturbance. Calder's eyes lit with a terrible sort of triumph. Yes, he breathed. Respond. Serve. He lifted his hands, calling to them in the old commands. And they ignored him. They turned toward Corin. Because he had woken them first. The half-formed constructs shambled forward, ragged, confused, driven by instinct more than intent. They were not the towering horrors of the past, but they were more than sheets of paper. They could crush, smother, overwhelm. Corin, Cyrene shouted, backing toward the courier. If you have a plan, now would be brilliant. He was drowning. Masquerade's magic pulled, the curse pushed, the Inkborn tugged from another direction entirely. His thoughts frayed. In the midst of that chaos, Lyra's presence remained a single, stubborn thread. Look at me, she said, cupping his face with her free hand. Her touch was warm, calloused, alive. He forced his eyes to focus on her. Hazel, ringed with gold. Steady even now. You are not a vessel, she said. You are not a tool. You are Corin Vale. You opened the door. You chose to help. You chose me. Something in his chest broke, not in the way the curse wanted, but like a knot finally coming loose. He realized, with a clarity sharper than any glyph line, that he did trust her. Completely. Then choose with me, she whispered. She shifted her grip, threading her fingers through his papery ones. Threads of her craft sank into his changed skin, tiny stabilizing stitches of light. Masquerade, she said, speaking not just with her voice but with her magic. You don't get to decide alone. You don't get to take without asking. That is not protection. That is control. And we will not be Calder. The cloak recoiled internally at the name. Corin felt its confusion, its hurt. Its burgeoning sense of self struggling to reconcile its maker's disapproval with its own instinct to do something. You want purpose. Corin managed to rasp, forcing his thoughts outward. Then listen. We define it now. Together. He lifted his free hand, half paper, half flesh, and laid it flat against the cloak's inner lining. Images flooded them both. Fen walking through the checkpoint, heart hammering. Lira at the work table, laughing softly over a crooked seam. Cyrene slipping past a guard with a false uniform and a real mission. Children in too large coats, hidden in plain sight from men who would drag them away. Not battles. Not glory. Not thrones. Just people, needing to be unseen long enough to live. That, Lira whispered, tears stinging her eyes, that is what you were made for. The cloak shuddered. Behind Calder, the enforcers reloaded, shouting as the half-formed constructs stumbled closer. Bolts struck paper bodies, knocking chunks loose, but new folds formed, clumsy and relentless. Calder's voice cut through the chaos. Obey me, he roared at the rising constructs. I am your master now. You are no one's master, Lira snapped. She pulled one of her own needles from her sleeve, a slender, gleaming thing threaded with silver. She drove it into the cloak's edge, not to rip it, but to anchor a new seam. Consent, she breathed, stitching quickly. You protect only those who choose you. You shift only for those who ask. You never, ever take without permission. Her thread glowed as it sank into the fabric, weaving through Corin's glyphs, rewriting the deepest pattern. Corin added his own amendment, voice low and firm. And you never override a wearer's will. You amplify it. You hide it when needed. You never replace it. Masquerade twisted, writhing in his mind and around his body, fighting the restructuring. It hurt, a deep, wrenching pain like pulling hooks from skin. He held on. So did she. The cloak screamed, but not in sound, not in any audible way. It was a psychic flare that shook dust from the rafters and sent the half-born construct staggering. Calder clutched his head with a cry, as if something had stabbed behind his eyes. The cloak's magic surged outward, brushing every animate thing in the hall, coat, constructs, even Calder's enforcers. For an instant, everyone froze. Corin felt Masquerade's perception widen. It saw Calder's men, some terrified, some eager, some resigned. It saw Cyrene's stubborn protectiveness. It saw Lyra's fierce compassion. It saw Corin's crippling fear and desperate, aching hope. And it made a choice. Not to become a king of disguises. Not to become a general. To become a shield. The magic snapped into a new shape like a bone setting. Masquerade unwrapped itself from Corin's body, not leaving him, but no longer trying to inhabit him. It flew from his shoulders in a sweeping arc, its hood flaring. Calder shouted an order, the enforcers raised their crossbows. And found themselves suddenly wearing different faces. Masquerade swept past them, its magic brushing over each man's features. Their expressions shifted, uniforms subtly altered, insignia blurred then rearranged. In the confusion, they turned toward each other with weapons drawn. Hold, one barked. You're aiming at your own. Another bolt flew, striking a paper construct. Paper folded around it, absorbing the blow. The hall devolved into chaotic misrecognition. Enforcers shouted at enforcers, unsure who was friend or foe. The half-formed constructs, confused by the signatures shifting around them, turned away from Corin's group and wandered aimlessly, bumping into pillars and each other like drunk giants. Only Calder stood unmoved. He raised a hand, magic glinting in the silver rings he wore. He spoke a word of unmaking, a sharp, cold syllable aimed directly at Masquerade. The cloak faltered mid-flight. Threads snapped. Glyphs flickered. It won't hold, Corin ground out. He felt the backlash tug at his curse, trying to drag him under again. His unraveling it. Lyra's jaw set. Not if I restitch faster than he tears. She ran forward. Lira. Corin shouted. Too late. Calder saw her coming. He extended his other hand, tracing a sigil in the air. Invisible threads coiled around her ankles, seizing. She stumbled, hitting the ground hard. Snow bit her palms. You disappoint me, Calder said, his voice carrying easily over the chaos. I expected you to flee. But perhaps this is more fitting. Watching you struggle was always illuminating. He stepped toward her, boots crunching on debris. Let her go, Corin rasped, taking a step and nearly falling to his knees as his curse spasmed. His right arm from elbow to fingertips was now almost entirely parchment smooth, cracks forming where skin should flex. I don't take orders from criminals, Calder said. Or from frightened children playing at Revolution. He reached down, fingers closing on the line of thread attached to Lyra's bound ankles. You and I are going to have a very productive conversation about how you made that cloak. Lira met his gaze with loathing and, beneath it, a flicker of something like pity. You still think I'm yours to direct, she said. He yanked sharply on the thread. And the coat stepped between them. No time to think. It simply moved. One moment it was beside Corin, the next it was in front of Lira, empty sleeves flaring as it took the brunt of Calder's pulling spell. The threads meant for her wrapped around its fabric instead, constricting, biting deep. The coat convulsed. Corin shouted, feeling the impact as if his own ribs were being crushed. The old bond, formed in quieter days of testing and tinkering, flared bright. This creation had been with him from the start of this misadventure, absorbing his caution, his protectiveness. It had decided, in whatever strange way it thought, that Lira mattered to him. And it had acted accordingly. Stop, Corin snarled, staggering forward. Calder, stop. You're tearing. Good, Calder said. One less abomination in this city. The coat's seam screamed. Something snapped, not a thread, not a bone, but a pattern. The coat's glyphs flared once, bright white, and then burst like embers, scattering into flickers of light that sank into the hall floor. The fabric crumpled. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then a low, growing sound filled the hall. Rustling. The paper constructs, half-formed, aimless, turned toward the fallen coat as if hearing a signal. They shuffled, stumbled, crawled, drawn to the inert garment like moths to a flame. Calder stepped back, alarm flashing across his face. What? The constructs melted. Their forms disintegrated, pages tearing free, glyphs dissolving. The paper rose in a swirling storm, drawn into a tight spiral above the coat. Shreds of old ink, fragments of failed spells, memories of violence, they all whirled together around the simple, selfless act of a garment that had thrown itself into harm's way. Masquerade faltered in midair, then swooped down, wrapping once around the vortex as if to contain it. Corin, Lira whispered, awe and fear mingling. What's happening? He stared, heart hammering. They're choosing a new pattern, he said. A different center. The storm of paper narrowed, condensed, sank. Into the fallen coat. The cloth rose. Slowly, shakily, like someone standing after a long illness. Its seams glowed with new lines, more complex than any Corin remembered inscribing. Masquerade's glyphs stitched themselves along its edges, not dominating but intertwining, forming a network of protections and constraints. The coat stood between Lira and Calder again. But this time, it wasn't just a coat. It was every decision they'd made, every refusal to surrender autonomy, every attempt to protect rather than control, given form. Enough, Corin said, his voice low and hoarse but steady. He stepped forward, joining the coat. His paper-slick hand brushed its sleeve, it felt surprisingly solid. Calder, he said. You can try to bend every craft in this city to your will. But you will not bend this. Calder scoffed, though a sheen of sweat glistened at his temple. You think that thing will listen to you? No, Corin said softly. It will listen to itself. The coat, no, the construct wearing the coat, turned its headless attention toward Calder. Not with hatred. With judgment. Threads of Masquerade's magic extended from its cuffs, thin as spider silk, fanning out through the hall. They brushed against the enforcers, still milling in confusion, and against Cyrene and the courier, and against Lira, and against Calder himself. They tasted intent. The enforcers, for the most part, did not want to die today. They wanted pay. Security. A way home. Cyrene wanted her people alive. Lira wanted freedom, for herself, for Corin, for the magic they were trying to make better. Calder wanted control. The threads recoiled from him like nerves from a hot iron. He snarled, raising his hands to cast again, but his enforcers were already pulling back, muttering uneasily, shaken by the shifting faces and the writhing constructs and the feeling of being measured by something that was not quite human. Sir, one ventured. Maybe we should. Cowards, Calder spat. You think the council will protect you if these freaks take over? They'll tear everything apart. Calder. Lira's voice cut across his rant like a blade. He turned, eyes blazing. You taught me that a garment's purpose is decided by its maker, she said. But you never understood that people decide their own. You've spent so long stitching others into your patterns you forgot they're not cloth. And what are you, then? He demanded. Without the guild? Without me? She smiled, small and sad. Free. He lunged for her, fury overriding calculation. The coat moved. It didn't strike. It didn't lash out. It simply stepped forward and extended one sleeve in a sharp, precise motion, knocking Calder's hand aside. Not enough to injure. Enough to unbalance. Calder stumbled on a fallen beam. His foot slipped. He hit the ground hard, air punched from his lungs. Silence fell. It wasn't the silence of magic or of fear. It was the silence of something ending, a story that had been spinning for too long finally reaching the edge of its thread. The enforcers looked at their fallen master, then at Corin and Lira and Cyrene and the constructs. One by one, they lowered their weapons. "We're done here," one said quietly. "There's no council warrant worth dying in a haunted ruin for." Calder wheezed, clutching at a shattered plank, trying to haul himself up. "You can't leave me." But they were already backing toward the door. "We'll report that we found nothing," another enforcer said, not quite meeting Calder's eyes. The fugitives slipped away. "This place is dead." "And so," Cyrene added dryly, "is your influence in this district." She watched them go, shoulders tense until the last of their footsteps faded into the snow-muted city. Only then did she sheath her dagger. "I am never," she announced, "doing business involving sentient textiles again." The coat's sleeve twitched, as if amused. Corin let out a breath so shaky he had to brace himself against a pillar. The curse crept no further, but it didn't recede either. His arm remained papery, cracked in places, painful. Lira was at his side in an instant. "Let me see." "It's fine," he said. She gave him a look that brooked no argument. He surrendered his hand. She turned his wrist gently, examining the delicate, parchment-like surface. Her fingers skimmed the edges of the cracks, careful not to tear. "You've held this curse alone for too long," she said softly. "Let me help hold it now." "That's not how curses work," he said weakly. "That's not how they used to," she corrected. "But we're not doing things the old way anymore, are we?" From a pocket in her coat, she pulled a small, bone-handled needle and a spool of extremely fine thread almost invisible. "May I?" she asked. He swallowed. "What will it do?" "Bind, a little," she said. "Not to trap you, but to reinforce the cracks. A collaboration. Like the coat." He hesitated, then nodded. She stitched. Tiny, precise motions, each one guided by both her understanding of seams and her memory of glyphwork. She wasn't inscribing symbols, she was translating them into thread, crafting a physical echo of Corin's own stabilizing wards. He felt the thread sink into his altered skin, cold and warm at once. The cracks in his arm pulled together slightly, not healed but less raw. The creeping tightness eased. He realized, with a start, that for the first time since the curse had been laid on him, someone else's craft was sharing its burden. "How does it feel?" she asked quietly. He flexed his fingers. They moved stiffly but without the tearing sensation. "Like you've sewn a truce," he said. "Between what I am and what I'm becoming." She smiled, eyes bright. "Then we'll keep renegotiating, as needed." Masquerade drifted down to them, its movements slower now, more deliberate. It hovered in front of Lira, then dipped as if in a nod. She reached out, laying her hand on its hem. "Thank you," she said, "for choosing the harder path." It brushed against her fingers, then against Corin's stitched wrist. He felt not hunger now, not ambition, but something like satisfaction at having found a shape that fit its purpose. The coat, no longer just a coat, but not quite an inkborn either, stood quietly nearby, posture relaxed for the first time. "What do we do with them?" Cyrene asked, eyeing the garments warily. "We can't exactly toss them in a trunk and hope they behave. We make them part of the solution," Corin said slowly. Lira nodded. "We set stricter rules. We build safeguards into every seam. And we don't leave them unsupervised." Cyrene raised a brow. "You're suggesting, what, exactly?" "A place," Lira said, "where magic like this is developed openly, with rules and oversight, not in hidden corners or behind guild walls." Corin met her gaze. "An atelier," he said. "Not Calder's. Not the old orders. Something new." She smiled, small and tired and full of stubborn hope. "Vale and Fenwick," she said. The name settled between them like a promise. Cyrene snorted. "You're really going to put your names on the door of the people experimenting with sentient clothes?" "Transparency," Lira said. "If we're going to change how enchantment works in Evrelin, we can't do it from the shadows." Cyrene considered that, then sighed. "Fine. But I reserve the right to say I told you so if one of your garments tries to run for council." The cloak's hood twitched, as if intrigued by the idea. "Don't encourage it," Corin muttered. Lira laughed, a bright sound in the cavernous ruin. They left the old atelier an hour later, once the last of the paper storm had settled and the wounded courier could stand. Cyrene saw him safely to one of her safe houses, muttering about changing all their routes now that Calder had sniffed too close. Word spread faster than they expected. Rumors of Calder barging into the old quarter, of his men attacking unarmed residents, of constructs rising and then standing down when commanded not by him but by a cursed mage and a runaway tailor. Of enforcers laying down arms and walking away from a fight. The council did not appreciate the publicity. Officially, Calder was relieved of his duties pending review. Unofficially, his influence withered. Merchants stopped commissioning his most ostentatious works, nervous about their association with a man whose temper had nearly sparked another magical incident. Younger tailors began whispering about other ways to practice their craft. The tailors' consortium sent a stiffly worded notice to Lira, demanding her return. She burned it. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. This one, more carefully phrased, acknowledged her unique contributions to the field and expressed an interest in collaborative structures outside traditional apprenticeship. No mention of ownership. No threats. She did not burn that one. She filed it away, a reminder that even monoliths could shift under enough pressure. The new atelier sat on a quiet street halfway between the textile district and the old quarter. The building had once been a perfumery, it still smelled faintly of spices and flowers. They repainted the front door a soft, unremarkable grey and hung a hand-lettered sign above it, Vale and Fenwick discreet enchantments and practical illusions by petition only. Cyrene insisted they add the last line. Otherwise you'll have half the city banging down your door asking for romantic disguises, she said. Or worse, pranks. They took only cases that met their new rules. No glamours to aid in bribery. No disguises to help someone escape legitimate justice. No enchantments requested on behalf of someone not present to consent. They made coats that softened harsh outlines for frightened witnesses. Cloaks that blurred scars without erasing them. Simple garments that made a person look just forgettable enough to slip away from a stalker. Masquerade lived on a special stand in the back workroom. It still shifted when someone particularly panicked stepped into the shop, its fabric rippling in response. But it did not move unless both Corin and Lira agreed it should. Its threads remembered the constraints Lira had stitched and seemed, if not happy, then settled. The coat hung beside the front door when not in use. Sometimes, when a client left looking more at ease than they'd arrived, the coat's hem would twitch, as if pleased. Corin pretended not to notice. Lira did not. She smiled every time. On a late afternoon heavy with imminent rain, Corin sat at the work table, carefully inscribing a simple, low-risk glyph for a child's school satchel, one that would shout if someone tried to steal it. His papery wrist twinged, but Lira's stitches held. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Lira descended from the loft, a pencil tucked behind her ear, a smudge of chalk on her cheek. You're frowning, she said lightly. Too much, and your face will crack before your arm does. He huffed a soft laugh. Terrible joke, he said. 10 out of 10. She came to his side, leaning against the table. How's the curse today? Behaving, he said. Mostly. Your truce is holding. Our truce, she corrected. He looked at her, really looked. At how she'd carved out a life for herself that was not a guild script. At how she'd chosen to stay, even when things had gotten dangerous. At how she still reached instinctively for his hand when walking through crowded streets, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I never thanked you properly, he said. For what? She asked. Dragging you into multiple near-death experiences? For not letting me fold, he said. In more ways than one. She smiled, softer now. You opened the door, she said. Everything that came after, we chose together. He hesitated. His heart thumped against ribs that felt, mercifully, like bone again. Lira, he began, and faltered. She tilted her head. Yes. He cleared his throat. I am not certain what the future of paper magic looks like in this city. Or hybrid craft. Or any of this. Neither am I, she said. But I find, he said slowly, that the only variable I don't fear anymore is you. Her eyes widened a fraction. That came out wrong, he blurted. I mean, I've feared what my magic would do to you, yes, but not you yourself. I mean, I trust you. To challenge me. To stop me. To stand with me. He forced himself not to look away. Maker's Ink, he finished, voice low, I want you here. Not just as a partner in craft. As everything else, too. Her breath caught. Everything else, she repeated. We can draft a more elegant confession later, he said, attempting a smile. But that is the current draft. She laughed, and there were tears in it. I like this draft, she said. Even if it needs some refinement. She reached up, brushing ink from his cheek with her thumb in a gesture that felt more intimate than any spell they'd cast. Then, slowly, deliberately, she took his hand. I want to be here too, she said. With you. With all this madness. With coats that throw themselves in front of bolts and cloaks that argue with me in my sleep. Do they? He asked, startled. Only when you overwork, she said. They're very judgmental. He laughed, the sound easing something tight in his chest. Then we'll rest, he said. Sometimes. Together. She squeezed his hand. That sounds right. He lifted her hand, papery skin and thread-bound wrist and all, and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a quiet, reverent touch. Not claiming. Not demanding. Simply stating, in the language of old courtesies, that she mattered to him more than fear. She blushed, but didn't pull away. Masquerade rustled softly on its stand, like a curtain catching a breeze. The coat's cuff twitched. Don't start, Lira said toward them. You two had your dramatic moment already. Corin smiled. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, washing the last of the snow from the streets. The city of Evrelin went about its business, guild wagons and rebel couriers and merchants and children, all of them walking beneath a sky that seemed, for the first time in a long time, a little less heavy. Inside the atelier, paper and lace and thread and ink existed in uneasy, hopeful harmony. A cursed paper-mage and a runaway tailor bent over the same worktable, crafting small miracles with careful hands, each stitch and stroke a quiet defiance of the idea that power had to mean control. Their creations watched, and listened, and within carefully drawn boundaries, learned. The story that had begun with ink whispering in silence now continued in the soft rustle of pages and the susurrus of cloth, in promises spoken not in grand speeches but in the gentle overlap of two lives choosing, again and again, to be bound not by fear, but by trust.